and girls. We are going to talk about GDPR, and I don't know how many of the students that you have had to implement it, but we'll also. So it stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It was rolled out in Europe. We got all these, subscription emails from the woodworks, renewing subscriptions because of GDPR policies, but it applies to, it's a pretty broad regulation. And even though I think a lot of people think that it's limited to EU, it has a lot of impact on the United States, and there's a lot of industry chatter that something similar to GDPR will be rolled out in the U.S. Sooner than later. So that's why I think this is kind of important. And if you're working for any multinational corporation, then you kind of have to pay attention to it. So.
I remember when it came out last year, wasn't it? And I think like the very day it came out, Facebook and Google were sued for billions of dollars for GDPR violations. So yes, absolutely. American companies are definitely affected by it if you have any European customers.
Yep. So that's but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to it. So this is my intro slide. Barkha Herman, originally from India. I've lived in Florida for 30 years, and for those of you who are even remotely interested in personalities and such, I'm an ENTP, and I believe whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And here's some of the companies.
I'm sorry, what was that? So you're just saying you can do whatever you believe yourself to be. Is that, you think you can't?
That's exactly right. So if you argue for your limitations, then yes, you're going to be.
I love it. I love it.
And that's a Ford. That's a very common Ford, Henry Ford quote. So whether you believe you can,
okay,
or you can't, you're right. So anyway. So these are some of the companies that I work for. I'm currently working for Microsoft as a cloud solution architect, and so it's more of a helping clients implement things. And here are some of the other companies. So welcome, and here's the agenda. I went over a little bit on GDPR, and then we're going to talk a lot more about GDPR, what it is and how it impacts you, and what you have to do to prepare for its arrival. And then we're going to have a Q&A session and then closing. So I think that something like this was needed since the internet was pretty much like the frontier of technology, and people started creating companies and protocols and networks, and we started exchanging all kinds of stuff. We started tracking each other. So there has been for a very, very long time a lack of clarity and consistency for protection for personal data. So this is where I think GDPR is so monumental, in that it actually lays down very clear and concise rules for data protection. So what does it include? It has personal privacy rights. It has increased responsibility for the brokers of data. So we'll see that in a little bit, for protecting the data that they collect. So, whereas, we can talk about the Googles and the Facebooks of the earth, and yes, they have a lot of our data, and yes, they need to be sued to abuse it. But it's also, the mom and pop shop that collects data on people. So, and there's no policy in place that governs everybody. So one of the common patterns, and everybody here is going to a CISSP, so security space. is familiar with the pattern where, you know, I will create a user and a password, which is my favorite password. It requires all the rules and all the consistently requirements of being a strong password, and then I'll use it everywhere. So yes, you know, the Google may protect it, my password by using two-step authentication and all that stuff. But if I use the same password at my dry cleaner's website to see if my dry cleaning was picked up, and they get hacked, then you know you're kind of damaging your entire network footprint. So GDPR will apply equally to in all cases. Um, the other third thing is we've seen this a lot of times. Companies get breached and they don't even tell anybody about it, right? So one of the requirements in GDPR is mandatory breach reporting. And also there's a very clear and significant penalty for non-compliance. So what are the key changes with GDPR? So personal privacy. So individuals have the right to, and this is very interesting stuff, and I wonder if we can even do this today with something like Facebook, right? Individuals have the right to access their personal data, correct errors in their personal data, erase their personal data, which is something that I don't think any of these companies provide support for. And then object to processing of their personal data and also export their personal data. So, you know, when we talk about, you know, systems for healthcare and things like that, we do have HIPAA type regulations that deal with some of these issues. Um, you know, um, due to HIPAA regulation in the United States, we do have in place um, the ability to take your whatever medical records or whatever it is, you have access to it. You can get it fixed. You can review it. You can take it from one place to the other, and you can request deletion for it. But you don't when it comes to, you know, a bank using, let's say, Social Security or something for um, um, you know, verification or something like that. They have that information. And again, maybe bank is not a good example because FDIC rules on that. Um, but you know, but your school may ask you for your Social Security number and keep track of it. And then what do you know, what do they do with that information? Where does it go? There's no clarity on how to deal with that. So that's one of the challenges. Um, so the second is the controls on notification. And let me know if there's any questions related to this. I'm not seeing the chat right now. So
I can see the chats, and we just see a comment that Facebook doesn't even allow you to change your default email address.
yeah. So we get to be kind of clear on what personal data is. And yes, email is part of that, what is governed. And you can delete your account in order to change your email and things like that. So yes, Facebook will have to change those policies. However, you know, when we talk about personal data, we're talking about PII. So email is part of it to a certain extent. Just your name wouldn't be, though, you know, because your
Barkha,
name.
I don't know if you saw this. I thought this was one of the funnier leaks, and you missed it. But I've got like 9 Alexas now around the house and in the office, and apparently there is some venue to see, because Alexa's always on recording you, just like Google's always on, even when your phone is locked, it's still listening to you. And a guy was able to get the recordings. There was some way for him to play back and possibly erase, but there was a glitch, and he didn't get his. He got somebody else's personal conversations, that recordings.
Wow.
So you think about, with these more and more people putting them in. I know I'm as bad as anybody. I love the features, but what is going on with all that data? Now,
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, and you bring up a really good point, Larry, is that IoT is everywhere. And if you think that, so Internet of Things is everywhere. And if you think that, you're the Luddite and you're not, oh, I don't buy the enhanced, I don't have an Alexa in my house. Well, every computer is recording you, every phone you buy is recording you. You're, most of the appliances, electric companies are collecting data on your usage and consumption, and they have the capability of do a lot more. So it's inevitable. So
there was a recent one, and I have a buddy of mine who has sleep apnea, and he's got one of those machines. I forget what they're called there, but it monitors his sleeping habits, and they just showed that they were leaking data to insurance companies to adjust his rates based on his sleeping habits.
yeah, yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that so this speaks to objective processing of their personal data. So beware of what you buy. So.
I want to interrupt you again. I tried to, but because of my Alexa, I've been installing in these light bulbs, and they all go to China, and they have Wi-Fi and they have microphones on them because they can react to music. So I figure, what's to stop these light bulbs from listening to every conversation in my house and sending it to China?
As a matter of fact, nothing. And also, we're thinking just in terms of software and data, but hardware has stuff built into it that can be challenging. So there's a company that's making a new OS and new devices where they have physical switches where you can turn off the mics. So it's called Purism. So look at that. And this is just for personal stuff.
We see a comment that GE is putting IoT devices in the cargo trains. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Yeah, yeah. So as a company that is actually collecting this data, and they're calling these processors, data processors. What you get to do is protect personal data using appropriate security practices. So this is for breach and leaking data and that kind of stuff. But and also you get to notify authorities in 72 hours of breach. Also, you have to actually have consent, and that's what that email, the double check-in email thing was. Remember back in the day we had forms where they just subscribed you automatically, and then you didn't realize you were subscribed, and then you had to actually go in on a unsubscribe. You can't do that. You have to actually have an explicit consent. It can't be a click to not consent. It has to be click to consent kind of thing. So, and we saw that in all our emails that we were getting. And then the other part of it is you actually have to keep records on what the data processing will be, and if there's policy changes, then you have to actually post it and get another consent and renew consent and all that stuff. So and as far as policies are concerned, you need to have clear notice of data collection policy, and also retention policy, and what is the purpose and the use. So all these places that help you out with giving you information but collect your email data as well as pattern of usage or what you search and then sell it, which Google is the biggest offender, but there are other places that do that. So I don't know if you guys have ever gotten an e-bite. Evite is the biggest spammer of all. Like you create, some friend of yours creates a invitation, and then now they decide to send it to you. You haven't consented to receiving this. Your buddy, somebody you barely know, and now suddenly your email has been hacked, has been sold.
Oh, right. So it's like, yeah, so and so wants you to join their such and such network. And I was
Yeah,
like, what's wrong with my
exactly.
LinkedIn? You got me from LinkedIn. That was fine.
Well, not only that, hey, I'm inviting you to a birthday party. I don't want to bother going to the store and
Oh,
buying greeting
wow.
cards.
And now your
I'm going
email
to
address is
use
there.
eBite to do it. And well, guess what? eBite is one of the biggest offender. And I'm calling out eBite, but there's 10 flavors of it. You know, there's other companies that do that kind of stuff. So I actually get upset when somebody sends me an email like that, and I reach out to them and say, look, do not share my email with other companies. So,
As a parent, I get upset when a teacher will send email to all the students' parents, and they put all our addresses in the to field, so
right,
we can
right.
all see each other. Eric comments that he loves the Purism devices. He has the Librem 5. Is that the device you were talking about?
Yes, exactly right. And it's a great company, and I love the company. They're not the only one. There are other companies that are trying to do something similar. And so Purism does not track you. And also their devices have hardware switches, so you can turn off the microphone, and you can turn off the camera so that Google can't do it remotely, or some hacker can't do it remotely. I don't know if
We
Google.
hope. We hope.
Yeah,
You know, a lot of times I
well,
worry about the
it's a hardware
placebo
switch.
button.
It's a hardware switch. Yeah, it's a hardware switch. Yeah.
But as a packet sniffer guy, I'm always like, yeah, but why am I still seeing conversation, you know, with Wireshark? Did they
Yeah.
just say it's not available for me to notice? I mean, I'm just too paranoid sometimes.
Yeah. No, I mean, and you should be, but hopefully, you know, there's legal ramification for at least some of this stuff now.
Yeah.
So then the final requirement, so besides the controls and notification and transparent policies, the final requirement is for processors is training. So, you know, you have to train your personnel and employees. You have to audit and update data policies. You have to employ a data protection officer for larger organizations or for smaller organization. And GDPR goes into specifics of company sizes, and I'm not going to go into it right here. But you have to have a data protection officer to actually monitor this. So it's a full-time job. And then also manage manage how your vendors and other you know, so if you are wholesaling or, you know, aggregating services, you may have to share information about, or you use a shipping company, for instance, right? You may have to share your customers' data with somebody else. You have to ensure that their policies are also congruent with yours. So it's very extensive. I'll give you an example of something. So let's say that you know, you have, let's say you're in Europe, and let's say you're interviewing a candidate, and you sit down and you take notes about their interview process, and you put some comments or anything. You don't really enter them in the system. You're just taking notes. But if it's a OneNote or Evernote or something like that, you have now failed the GDPR policy. So think about that. So unless you actually explicitly delete it, you know, you are actually using an electronic way of saving, or even, you know, Google Docs. You
You
put
know, you actually
notes.
got me thinking about, and you do a lot of Microsoft work, the metadata.
Yep.
What about all the metadata that you might have thought you got rid of? And
So
it's
metadata is not as closely recorded. However, it depends. You know, not all metadata is created equal. So if it's a metadata saying, I interviewed a client, the interview started, and things like that, those are fine. Because those are public things, right? There's nothing personal about it. But I'm talking about, you know, if you're taking specific notes on, you know, this person seemed disinterested and they live too far, or they're whatever, something about their personal stuff. That is something you cannot save, and they can ask for a copy of that kind of documentation. So you have to, and normally it would not be considered data collection if you just write it on a piece of paper and destroy it. That's fine, because that's not covered under GDPR. It's when you actually use an electronic form. Yeah. So
I'm just
isn't that
picturing me
interesting?
being interviewed and somebody just to quit taking a quick note. He seems to know what he's talking about, but his nose is ridiculously big.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
think I want other people knowing that.
There you go. I don't know about the nose thing, but we'll see. But anyway, so it's not limited to Europe though. So the law imposes new rules on companies, government agencies, and organizations that do business in Europe. So any large company that you're working for, GDPR will apply to them.
And it kind of reminds me of Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a U.S. law, but it's for anybody who houses U.S. data. So
Right.
you could be all over the world. Anybody, and
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So so it comes down to personal data. So you really have to understand the data that you're collecting and the reason you're collecting it for. So here's a classification of so customer database, feedback forms filled out by customer, email content, photos, CCTV footage, loyalty program records, HR databases. These are all examples, and it's definitely not limited to this. So it's a lot broader. So one of the tricks that we do at Microsoft is that we do have a cache store that you can use, and that auto expires in 15 days. That's a great place to take notes that are specific to this kind of stuff, because according to GDPR, if somebody actually approaches you and says, hey, I'm requesting you to delete my data, you have 30 days to do it in. So if you are using non-volatile storage, then you're good. You don't have to do anything. So when we design, so me being a cloud solution architect, we design cloud solutions, and we know that there's going to be personal data collection, and it has to be it's volatile. It needs to be something that needs to be auto destroyed. We'll purposely create a store for that kind of stuff that is auto, so you don't spend cycles remembering to destroy it, right? So if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
So
Since I know you're at Azure, there's a test question that's shown up recently on the CISSP about crypto shredding and fade. Are you dealing with any of that file assure deletion?
yeah. So if you wanna, I can show you the template with all the certifications that Azure has, and they take this stuff very, very, very seriously. So so they ensure that when you tear down any data storage devices within Azure, that it goes through and it's a final deletion. There's no remnants of the data. So, and every service has their own way of doing it, and I don't want to go into it.
That's fine.
So so this is the cycle. Stricter controls on personal data, where it's stored and how it's used, better data governance, tools for better transparency, record keeping and reporting, and improved data policy to provide control and ensure laws. So this is it. I want to pause and ask questions at this point. Ask 4 questions, I should say.
Anybody here? you've been typing some stuff in, but let's. I'm just curious. Like I know immediately we had lawsuits with Google and Facebook, but you know it's the old until I see somebody punished for it, the law enforced. I don't know that I'm going to worry about it. So sometimes they need to make examples, so to speak. Do we know of any cases where GDPR fines have been assigned and they were forced to pay up?
Um, so I know that there were lawsuits filed, but I don't know of any off the top of my head. So
Oh, Eric has a great one because I can remember this issue going back before. In fact, one of my speakers years ago did a talk. He's asked about closed circuit television footage in Europe, and there was a really funny slide. This guy said, "Is the number of complaints about personal information had gone up, the size of the camera just went down. They just we'll make it so you can't see the camera." But cameras are all over Europe, and he said,
yeah,
"Does that
Europe
mean?"
is bad about it.
Yeah, so
So yes, the answer is yes,
you
and
can later demand that they delete the footage that contains you?
yes. So so the challenge there is that you have 30 days to do it in. So if you're the kind of person who has CCTV that auto deletes in 30 days, that's perfectly fine. So that shouldn't even matter. But yes, if you are keeping copies of it, um, then then you're in trouble. So you have to wonder, how does the U.S. government fare in that, huh?
Yeah, or any government. But I have cameras that at my front door, and they get saved to the cloud at Amazon. They're the Blink cameras, and I have usually it's like UPS delivery people. If it's not my family, it's usually UPS delivery people. As long as they're not Europeans, I don't have to worry about it. Or should I be automatically deleting them from the cloud?
Yeah. So, think about the scenario. The deleting is easy because you just go into a store and say, "Hey, delete my footage after I want you to delete my footage," right? And if they have a policy in place that they just delete all the footage at 30 days after something happened, then it's not even a problem, right? Think about the scenario where they say, "Hey, I want my footage." Because that's something that's part of GDPR.
Oh, is that
Is
right?
that you can demand. So everybody goes and says, "Hey, I want my footage," but you can't give them footage of other people coming in. So that's a more
Wow.
complicated
Wow.
question, and I don't know if there's been any cases of that happening, and I don't know if that's even applicable. Like, how can a mom and pop shop give you edited footage of just you? It's not going to happen.
Oh
So
no, that's not going to happen. That's just more work I want to offload on Alexa.
there you go. There you go. So, so this slide, I mean, it just goes and says identify what personal data you have. I think we've gone over this a little bit. So, I'm going to wrap up the presentation part of this at this point, and ask if anybody has questions, really.
I have and it's no, and it's because of a test, a question, a terminology used in practice tests that I can't find NIST. I could find them using it, but they use the term data steward and data owner interchangeably. But a lot of CISSP practice tests use them differently. And I was bringing up in one of my classes that I can't find a hard fast, right? And one guy said, no, GDPR uses the term, and they're different. Are you familiar with the term data steward? It's showing up
So
in GDPR?
yeah, they actually go into the glossary if you actually go to the GDPR site.
I have
And
Googled it.
and I have some links. If you go to just microsoft.com/GDPR, there's a lot of information there, and it's publicly available. You don't have to buy Microsoft products or anything, but they do go into a lot of it. So But data steward is the person who is actually, there's a difference between a data processor and a data steward. So the data processor actually collects the data and does something with the data. A data steward is a company that actually doesn't do any processing, but so let's say a shipping company would be a data steward. So they actually use it, but they don't process it. They don't do anything with it. But they get it from somebody else, and they are the stewards of your data. They need it only for the purpose of, printing shipping labels and figuring out where it goes. And then, ideally, you're supposed to destroy it.
So I give my information to Amazon to ship me a product. Amazon, in that case, is a data processor. They send that shipping information to UPS, and they're just data stewards that are not changing
Correct.
anything, but they're
Correct.
using it to know how to.
Correct. So that would be an example, unless UPS does something with it. So, but yeah, they're data stores. They need to use the data on Amazon's behalf, but they're really not collecting it. They're not changing it. They're not doing anything. So they're considered. So that's an example. But by all means, go to the website and figure it out. Yeah, check it out. I would, if you have to implement the policy, I would really, it's very involved. So,
I guess for me, the first one was, I guess, HIPAA 2002, maybe?
yes, yeah.
And HIPAA went out, and it's like May 1st or whatever, and the first lawsuits are May 2nd. And then it allowed people, they said, we're getting too many lawsuits, let's extend out to some time there. But it's just yet another thing that people have to track. As you say, this reaches into anybody that has a European customer that houses it.
Yeah, and it's extensive, and it's not just, if you are using a European subsidiary to do something, or a European company is using you as a subsidiary, now you become a processor or a steward, depending on which way that goes. So.
Interesting. And then the other thing is, you said that, and I do recall seeing something about that there is, and I think it's in California, where they're trying to implement a U.S. version of GDPR.
It's coming to U.S. It's in California, maybe the first one. However, it's not going to be a long time. It's happening. Rest assured.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Peter just did a talk. I don't know if you were that diligent. I tried to listen to his conversations with Dan Sullivan, where they have their monthly chats, and I wanted to write something about, because he said, "Is privacy dead?" With all of the the things that record and maintain data on you, your phone constantly.
So there's two competing things going on in the world, right? So there's the big data and data collection and all this stuff, but then there's the regulations that are coming down. So yes, from that perspective, it would seem like privacy is dead. But on the other side, and it's not, I know we've talked about crypto a little bit and blockchain a little bit, and everybody thinks of it as coins and tokens, but it's changing infrastructure. It's changing the way data collection is being done. So that's the next, the other side, and that's coming, and it's in its infancy. So you won't see it yet. It's kind of like that conversation on MSNBC about email. What is it?
Oh
But
gosh, yes,
when it comes,
yes.
it'll be big.
Yeah. That was like
It'll be big, and it'll
early
take
90s
over.
thing. What
And
is an email? Yeah.
yeah,
I agree. I actually, being a crypto guy myself, this is not dead. We have the right to it. And it goes back, I always think of a conversation I had with a very dear family member, the great patriarch of my family, my Uncle George, who is a wonderful guy. He's always there to help people. we don't have the same political views all the time, and he's very conservative. And it was kind of funny when it was. I found out that Obama was recording conversations under his. He didn't like it, but while it was still Bush, and they were recording your conversations without telling us, he was defended it. And we had a conversation. It was probably around 2004, and he said, if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you care? And this was there was a whistleblower at AT&T that said, no, the NSA or the CIA, I forget what it was, put in these T3 phone sniffers that were just grabbing everything. In fact, you guys might want to remember, this is actually a testable objective, I would think, is that the signaling system, SS7, used to create, to do all the calls in the backbone, is very vulnerable to sniffing. So this happened, and he said, without warrantless, recording your conversation. He said, if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you care? And I said, Uncle George, I am not doing anything wrong in the bathroom, but there is a door on that room for a reason. And I promise you, I'm protecting you too. You don't really want to know what I'm doing in there. So I believe you have the right to privacy, and privacy is something personal. And then there's also things I do with my with my wife, say, that are between us, and we share those secrets, and we're not doing anything wrong. But we have the right to privacy.
Yeah,
so,
and we do have a constitution here, and we have the unreasonable search and seizure includes the word search, and it's not up to the government to decide whether or not what I'm doing is worth protecting or not. It's unreasonable if you're just blanket searching.
Well, and I think, a lot of it comes down to, we have the right to bear arms. And, I don't know that I need an automatic, rifle, but I do need cameras, and I do need encryption. And those are the arms that I think protect our information. Those are some of the most important things. And I think that I think Peter sometimes is saying it in such a way that, but even if you try to protect yourself, you can't, because of, and he even mentions that quantum computing is going to break encryption. I point out to my class, no, that's not probably true. It's probably going to break asymmetric, but we have countermeasures for that. And I think we just have to become smarter at it.
So part of the reason why quantum computing is going to break encryption is because it has the computing power to find those asymmetric key pairs or whatever, but it's also has the power to generate more complicated keys.
And we haven't even gotten to that. We're going to talk about quantum encryption as well. So that will help protect that. Now, Eric makes a comment: use tool or use signal. Very testable concept. The Trump campaign was using signal to encrypt conversations. But how did we figure out that they were talking to Russia? Because even if you encrypt the content of an envelope, I can still see the addresses on the label of where you're sending. So I don't know what you were saying, but you were talking to Russian agents a lot. They are still vulnerable.
And that's why, and that's why I don't, it's kind of like we are in that MSNBC scene of what is blockchain. We don't know where it's going to take us yet. And that's the part. And, I think the stock exchange will change completely. Banking will change completely. And also simple things like email and everything will change completely.
I personally, as a router guy, we've been doing consensus protocols in routing for a long time. And we looked at the latency of, say, like we look at Bitcoin, how slow it is compared to Visa or MasterCard. Well, that's the same thing in routing. We watch why OSPF doesn't converge as fast as, say, EIGRP. And I think we're going to mix those two together. We're going to borrow some of the best practices from routing to make our consensus protocols, our blockchain protocols, move much faster.
Yep. So anyway, I do believe that it's a bad time for privacy. I agree, but I don't think it's bad. I don't
No,
think it's
I agree. I absolutely agree that we'll just get smarter. We'll come up with better ways. And as you say, it's a two-sided, double-edged sword. That yes, quantum computing, if it works, Kurzweil's not a big fan, but if it does work out, yes, it'll give us the power to break older encryption protocols. It'll give us the ability to create better, and we already have better protocols in
Yep. Yep.
Barkha, thank you so much.
So sorry, it was kind of, I messed up a little bit.
I know I take full responsibility for that. I just let it go when I got all gaga over Chance Glasgow and I forgot about this. So I apologize. But thank you
Okay.
for making the time anyway.
So you have access to it now, right?
Did you hand it back over to me?
I don't know.
No, it says your host. So if you'll right click my name in the participants.
Yeah, I'm having trouble getting to that screen right now.
It's around there. Oh, exit full screen first, Nicholas is saying. Are you still in full screen?
No, all I can see is my little Zoom cloud meeting, join a meeting. The other screen is completely gone. You know, the other window, the one.
It should be
Oh,
there.
there it is. There it is. I found it.
There.
There you go. And then participants
Yep.
and more.
Isn't it funny being in technology and then
Make host.
stumbling
Yeah, there you
do
go.
something?
Yeah,
I set
there
up
you go.
I set up the meeting between the Abundance Group and Chance Glasgow the first time to do the Roomy, and I couldn't figure out how to get into Roomy the day of the presentation, and I couldn't get it.
No, this was just because it was minimized and hiding in a corner, and I was looking.
Yeah, same basic here. I figured it out as soon as the presentation
Yeah,
was over.
it's harder to do a meeting from a car than it is to
Are
do
you in your
from
car? Are you doing this on your
Yes,
phone?
yes.
Oh, thank you so
So,
much, Marka.
all right, guys. Talk to you soon.
Take care.